Welcome onto this edition of the Faster Beyond 50 podcast. In today's episode, we are talking about incorporating other sports into your running training plan. We're going to touch on the leans, which is something we've never spoken about. You might be going, what are the leans? You're going to find out about what those are today. We're going to talk about balancing your training when you are doing lots of things like triathlon, and a very, very cool question about zone 2 running for beginner runners. That's all coming up. My name is Brad Nadauld. We've got the coach, Lindsey Parry, with us once again today. Lindsey, nice to have you. I see you are adjusting. Was that just to show us the Liverpool badge the morning after?
Yeah, basically. I mean, we do have a fairly big listenership in the UK, so I'm sure there's a few people that just looked at my their screen, looked at my top, and just shaking their heads. But yeah, nice to be at the top of the pyramid. And last night we officially became league champions for the 20th time, drawing level with our great rivals Man United. And the only thing that is that I regret slightly is that it's much better beating your major rivals when they are good than when they are rubbish. And at the moment, I can't even tease Manchester United because it feels like kicking someone while they're down. So let's hope we stay where we are and that Man United catch up soon, so that the Premier League race can be more fun, um, beating our main traditional rivals.
Yeah, for those of you who don't follow soccer or football, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. That's a minute of your life you're never getting back, unfortunately. And I feel, Lindsey, this is a Q&A episode of this podcast, and I feel like we've got a plant on here that this was a setup, but it's not. This is a genuine question, and apologies for anybody who doesn't follow football. But our first question today comes from Scott Dill.
Hi guys, my name is Scott Dill. Based in Minneapolis, Minnesota in the States. And I heard you last week refer to what I would call soccer. I think you were referring to a certain team's loss, actually. But my question is about that. It's about the fact that I like to play soccer once a week. It's a community of guys. We're all in the 50s. It's a lot of fun. It's really hard. It really leaves my body pretty racked afterwards. I usually cover about 5 miles. My heart rate gets up as high as it ever does. I'm curious how I can fit that into a training plan. So I'm about 10 weeks out from a marathon. And what I've been doing is using that day as my anaerobic sprint workout day. Most of my training plan weeks have one day with a fast tempo run, one day with a anaerobic sprint workout, then some base miles and a low heart rate long run. Do you think that works? Curious your thoughts on that. It's definitely a lot harder for me to do the sprints. I'm focusing on form. I'm in my head more when I'm playing soccer. I'm just chasing the ball, not really thinking about the sprints. The sprints are all different kind of lengths, etc. So, but I would think there's a lot of good things coming from that, but I'm not sure. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Thanks.
Cool, Lindsey. Great question. And I think it applies to other sports too. Obviously, we'll answer Scott's in isolation with the football, but I think it could apply to things like tennis, things like paddle, which we'll get to too. Don't forget, if you do have a question that you would like us to answer here on this podcast, all you need to do is click on the link that's in the description of this podcast, whether you're watching it on YouTube or if you're listening on whatever podcast player you listen to, you can click on that link. We do filter the questions, the video questions up to the top, as Scott did. So make sure you do leave us a video question if you do want it answered. Lindsey, your answer for Scott.
So you absolutely need to acknowledge that is or should go down as a training session. There's no question. In terms of a direct comparison to a high intensity session, obviously we are trying to achieve slightly different things depending on the nature of that high intensity session that we are doing. So your specificity in the football example or field hockey are two great examples to use. Your specificity principle is going to be low. However, the high intensity nature of it means that I would absolutely use that as my high intensity session for the week without question. He said he's running 5 miles, which I'm guessing in a 50 plus game, he's probably playing in the midfield, taking into account, I mean, that's 8 kilometers for people who don't work in miles. Professional footballers do about 8 miles or 11 kilometers when they run in a match. So that gives you an idea that this is a fair amount of running, and most high intensity interval sessions that we set up are in that kind of 5 to 7 mile range. 8 to 10 kilometer range. That's kind of the ballpark. So from a volume perspective, it's right up there. There is probably more high intensity running in that 5 miles than there would be in a typical interval type of session. And so they are very, very good and very interchangeable. And in that scenario, I would use it as my high intensity session. We don't get this question often because there aren't as many people as you would think doing a second sport or using running as fitness for that sport, or the other way around, kind of just using that as the general principle. It is more common in soccer or football, and then field hockey is a big one that people do use and play until they are much older. Sports like rugby have a pretty high attrition rate. People stop playing them. Sports like tennis and padel and that kind of thing, while they are still of a high intensity nature, they have far less running. So they have a high impact. And so we do have to take cognizance of them and figure out how to plan our training around them. But they don't generally swap in and out for a running session as nicely as a football match or a hockey match would do. So yeah, in this instance, I would absolutely carry on doing that. And then in weeks where there isn't a football game, if there is a season break, for example, then I would get back to more traditional forms of interval training. But while you're preparing for an event and doing that, doing another high intensity session in the week, just a very high risk for injury, when from a pure physiological point of view, this is probably doing enough. And then from a neuromuscular point of view and coordination point of view, it's 100% doing enough. So over 50, go for it. What I want to say is that I often do this with young kids. So if I'm working with a young kid or someone's parents come and ask me to help out, is that I absolutely do use their sport as one of their high intensity sessions in the week.
Lindsey, I guess the danger is if you are training for an event, playing a sport like soccer or football or field hockey, there is an added risk of injury. And I'll use my brother as an example. I mean, he's training for an ultramarathon at the moment, and it's so funny. At the same time, last year something happened, and he hurt his ankle. This weekend, he's gone and hurt his toe doing something non-running related. So I guess there is that danger that you do need to take into account.
Yeah, there's always a risk. It's the same. I get the same question. Can I do trail running for my long run? And you can. There is an increased risk, but we're not professional athletes. This is part of our hobby. In this instance, football is a big part of his hobby, and it's not just a big part of his hobby; it's a big part of his weekly social engagement. It's a group of guys that get together once a week, have a good time, laugh at each other. So I certainly wouldn't tell people not to do it. But yes, we have to be mindful of the fact that in the last 5 minutes of the match, when you are 0-0 and you've got an opportunity to be the hero and stretch that leg out and sneak it inside the back post, of course the risk of your hamstring or glute going is there. But at the same time, I think the overall benefits of playing that football match are much higher than the risks that are there. And so what I would probably do is look at how important is the event that I'm training for to me. And maybe in the last few weeks, if I've been training very hard, maybe the last 3 weeks of the football match, I might volunteer to be the referee or the water boy. But yeah, on the whole, throughout the rest of the year, it's just a good way to train and hang out with your friends.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, great question. Thank you so much for that. Lindsey, a question in from Lynn. She also popped over to the link. She left us a text question a while ago. Lynn says, I was running a 200 miler, and that's where she lost me. I just couldn't read anymore. So this is the first time I'm kidding. 200 miles. I just can't wrap my head around running that far. That is incredible. Congratulations, Lynn. She said, I was running a 200 miler and gradually developed the leans. It ended my race at 123 miles. What causes this? What can I do to have this not happen again? Lindsey, before we talk Lynn specifically, what are the leans for those who don't know?
So it's typically when you're like almost folding in half. So and it's pretty weird, Brad. It's different for everybody. So some people collapse over to the side, and they favor one side over the other. For other people, it'll be like the forward leaning. And ironically, those are actually all three of those variations, left, forward, right, are probably better than, some people get the backwards, and you've probably seen this
The backwards one's
more.
probably because the backward one is a problem because then you're going uphill the whole way.
Exactly, that's what it looks like. But that describes that feeling. And then it's when you see people with their legs out in front of them, but it almost looks like their legs are collapsing with every stride, and typically you see that in the last kilometer of races. But that's really what it is that you lose control over your body. I mean, that's it in a nutshell, and it causes you then to be leaning or heavily over to one side. And the weirdest part about it is that the person that it's happening to often has no idea. I mean, obviously eventually it gets to a point where you of course you'll notice it, and it can get to a point, as in Lynn's case, where you actually have to stop because it becomes debilitating. But by and large, for a lot of people, you'll say to them, what's wrong? And they'll go, what do you mean? Well, you're leaning over to the side. Oh, am I? They don't know until it becomes like horribly obvious. But that's the leans, is when you are leaning back, forward, sideways. You don't have any control over it. And even once you've been made aware of it, you actually can't pull yourself up straight. Those muscles just don't do what they're supposed to do in holding you upright anymore. That is what happens.
All right. So how do we fix it?
So it has a strong neural and muscular component. So the fix is simple but not guaranteed because of the neural um, not neural input, that's not the right word, but because of the part of it being causation being neural, that doesn't always make it easy to fix. But obviously strength training will probably play the biggest role. But how do you, and again, this is a 200-mile race, so you've done lots of long training runs already. So how is a little bit of strength training when I say a little bit, 200 miles is just a very long way. How do you do enough strength training? And that's where the difficulty lies in. So we want to make our bodies strong, make sure that we have a holistic approach to strength training. So we do have a strong core, that we are focusing on all over body strengthening workouts. We want to do some proprioceptive exercises to keep the neural pathways open and firing. We do want to train and prepare well. And I'm assuming here that anybody who's running a 200-mile race has prepared well. I think that generally goes without saying. So the training component has been good. And then I would just look at a very holistic strength focus and make sure that it includes lots of proprioception. What does proprioception mean? It's your body's ability to be aware of itself in space, and it's teaching the right muscles to turn on and off at the right time. And so to do that, we have to throw ourselves out of balance, and we use things like stability balls, Bosu balls, Airx pads or stability pads. Those are the kind of devices that we'll then use to balancing on one leg, doing little single leg hops, doing some running drills on a trampoline is a really fantastic way to build proprioception and awareness of your body in space. balancing on one leg on a Bozu ball and throwing a tennis ball and catching it up against the wall. These are all really good ways of just working on those neural pathways, making sure that your body fires at the right time. And then, yes, making sure all the muscles are strong and being used in the way that they are supposed to being used. I think that's really important to do those and to get as strong as possible. On the day, if you get the leans, I haven't actually seen too many people being able to sort that out. I think in a race like a 200-mile race, there will be a cutoff, but cutoffs tend to be slightly less of an issue with those very long runs. So I think if you are someone who suffers from that, to be able to deload. So when you get into security checkpoints, or when you get to your seconders, have a chair there that you can sit down in and really just take a load off your feet, off your lower back, etc. I think those are some ways that you can try to push out. And I think particularly if the leans start, is to do that, and then to do some gentle massage so that you can wake the muscles up and hopefully get the muscles doing the job that they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, Lindsey, it's such a difficult one because Lynn's saying she got pulled at 123 miles. I mean, 123 miles is a long way to go. I mean, 200 is, I just can't wrap my head around. And a lot of these things happen late in these sorts of races. So you almost are trying to prepare for something that you don't actually know what's going to happen, and you can't simulate it happening again. So that's what makes it so difficult.
Yeah, exactly. And so, look, I recently did some work with a client that was doing one of these crazy things through the night. The Midnight Express was what it's called, and he'd had some problems deep in a few races that we've done. And so, what I suggested he do at a particular point in the race is get his seconds to make him up a bed. And he actually had a power nap. So he got there, he went to sleep. And we knew that he would struggle for the first mile or two after that sleep to get going again. But it worked wonders for him, and his body was miles better after that sleep. So you're right, you can't recreate these things. But I think in these long races, one of the advantages is that you do have these seconds there, and they can maybe see these things coming. And then, yeah, like something like a 20 to 40-minute power nap, it can work. So just really taking the load off everything, trying to stimulate those muscles again, like I said, with like a little bit of trigger point therapy. Obviously, you're already going to be sore, so we're not talking about digging your fingers in there, but just some gentle massage and trigger point work to try and fire those muscles up again. That would be some of the stuff I would try if it was happening to me. And I must also just put a disclaimer there that I haven't personally tried any of these things. I haven't done them on anybody, but I do know that in these deep races that I have now recommended to quite a few people, that they just take an absolute load off, sit down, lie down, have a nap. And that has worked for the people that I've tried that with.
Yeah. Great question, Lynn. Thank you so much. On to our next question, Lindsey. And this one comes from Paul Buck.
Brad and Lindsey, my name is Paul. I am 57 and live in Indiana in the United States. Thank you both for continuing to share your experience and expertise with us. I am an experienced runner, having run about 12 or 15 races in the early 2000s through about 2017, including Boston back in 2015. The next several years, I did not run much, although I continued to be active. In late 24, I returned to training and have subsequently run 2 half marathons, and am in the process of training for a 100K race in Virginia in December. I feel like I train well, I recover well, I eat well, sleep well. I do strength training 3 times per week, and yet am noticing paces of about a minute 15 to a minute 30 per mile slower. In addition to that, it is not at all uncommon for my cardiac drift to be upwards of 45 seconds to a minute over a 4 to 5 mile training run. I have had COVID at least 3 times, perhaps as many as 5 times in the last few years. And I'm wondering if that might be a contributing factor. And if so, if you have thoughts on what I could do about that, or if I'm just getting old and slow. Thank you both.
If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsey and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K, and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now, or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there. Lindsey, tough question to answer. You have to be very diplomatic here.
No, not really. I mean,
I'm
we
kidding.
are going to get older and slower, but that's a very big jump. So I totally understand the concern there. He did take a longish break, and with these questions, there's always like sometimes a little bit more information that would be good to gather. When training for the half marathons, is this basically an issue that's been there literally from the time he restarted running again in 2024? Or has he actually slowed more over this period of training? But it's not uncommon to be a whole lot slower than you were, if you've stopped running for 8 to 10 years, when you start again, it can be a whole lot slower. So that's the first thing. And then the second question always is in relation to what? So is he trying to peg a heart rate, and then at that heart rate he's a whole bunch slower? Or is it just a complete perceived exertion? He is running easy, and his easy now is that much slower. So those are questions that are always worthwhile asking. The good news is that because he did take a long break, and we are still quite early in 2025, so I don't know exactly when in 2024 he started, but there should be an ability to improve that. And then the final question around the number of times he's had COVID is that, yes, we know that COVID has an impact on heart rate. We know that in some people it's permanent. Maybe permanent is not the right word, but it's long term, so it lingers. In my personal experience, the last time that I definitely know that I had COVID, it took 2 months for my heart rate, exercising heart rate, to come back down to normal. So there can definitely be an impact. And obviously, if he's had COVID multiple times, we still don't really know the true impact of COVID. And we also know that it impacts different people differently. So anyway, what do we do about it? He's doing a lot of the right things. And one of the things that I've noticed when COVID was still like a really big thing and loads of people were getting it, but more importantly, when people were getting a label for it, like, I'm sick, you have COVID. Nowadays, I think people are back to calling it the flu. But what I have noticed when I work in those scenarios is that easy runs one of two things will happen. We'll either be very strict about that heart rate control, and then easy runs will be much slower than what I'm used to with those particular clients. And that can last for 2 weeks, 2 months, 6 months. But there's almost like it doesn't gradually improve like it does with a normal flu, cold, whatever. It stays, and then just suddenly tomorrow you'll be running much faster. So there isn't this very steady, gradual improvement. Which is very different. Or conversely, people will promise that they're running easy. They're running very easy. Their breathing is normal. So they're running at the pace they normally run it, but we rev 8, 10, 12, 15 beats higher than what we used to. And that trend will continue, boom, it'll fall off a cliff. So I think the important thing with whichever methodology you choose is that after any illness, or during any illness, when you exercise, during exercise is the only opportunity that virus gets to get into your heart to cause a pericarditis or myocarditis, which is which is why we don't like people exercising when they have a virus in the first place. But to ensure that there's a low risk to the individual, that's why we talk about this 80% of threshold. Because if you're below 80% of threshold, then your heart is under no stress, and you're very unlikely to get a viral infection. And so that's why we, particularly post-COVID or post-illness, that's why we like to keep at this 80%. And that's very conservative. 80% of threshold is very, very easy. And so you can probably go a little bit higher without actual risk to you yourself. And that's why, as long as you genuinely exercising easy, you can probably use either of those methodologies. The safer is to use heart rate and to keep your heart rate low. Now, this is where the problem comes in, when you're strictly going to heart rate and it starts to drift on long runs, and now you're already running slowly, but as your heart rate is starting to drift, you keep your heart rate low, and then your pace starts to drift, and now you already a minute per mile slower than you are used to running when it's easy, and by the end of the run you've added another 45 seconds to a minute. This is where the kind of concern comes in now, because we can fairly safely say that you don't have COVID at this point in time, and that a long time has passed. I wouldn't worry too much about I would allow the decoupling to happen on long runs, okay? And in other words, what will happen is that your heart rate will start to drift, not your pace. So let your pace, once you've you've set the intensity using heart rate at the beginning, let the heart rate drift. If it starts to go like 20 beats higher, of course, I would then start using walk, so run walk, to just bring that heart rate back down again, and then I'd slowly let it drift up again on long runs. On easy runs, I would peg that heart rate. And if it's COVID related, there will be a point in time where it'll suddenly rectify. If it's not COVID related, then what you should start to see is a very slow but steady improvement. And this is where, Phil Maffetone's MAF method is quite nice, because you have your fixed heart rate, and then every 4 weeks or so you run a test. And 4 weeks is enough, because there's a very slow improvement, but over 4 weeks we should see an improvement. Okay. Now, if we're not seeing an improvement, I think this will wrap up this particular question, is if we're not seeing an improvement doing that, it means that the dose that we're using is probably too low, and that what we probably need to do is to do some form of threshold test, so that we can work out a specific heart rate for you as an individual to target, because heart rate training doesn't actually work unless we have that minimum dose, because otherwise we just kind of stay. The training isn't wasted, but we don't get the aerobic development that we want and need. And so, if you're not seeing a month-on-month improvement in pace, and then, of course, there's this third layer, Brad, is that we are dealing with an aging population. And so there comes a point in time where actually nothing we do will make us faster. We get slower, but we shouldn't be falling off a cliff. So that getting slower should be a very gradual process. We shouldn't be losing 20 seconds a mile, 30 seconds a mile. It should be a few seconds a mile per year if we are doing all the things correctly.
Cool. Great question. Thank you very much for that, Paul. And then, Lindsey, question from Jason. It's also heart rate related, but it's around beginners. I love this. Absolutely love this question.
I'm Jason from Denver, Colorado. I have a question about Zone 2 training, but specifically how it applies to total beginners without a history of physical activity. I've started to notice a counter trend emerging on social media recommending against it for total beginners who struggle to keep their heart rate in Zone 2. I tend to hear three main arguments. The first argument is that beginners don't have very distinct heart rate zones, and any running at all will cause their heart rate and lactate levels to skyrocket, so there's little point in trying to be so specific about a narrow heart rate range. The second argument is that beginners don't run very frequently. Let's say it's 3 times per week. And so that leaves plenty of rest days to recover. And because that volume is so low, it doesn't have to consist of mostly zone 2 running. And lastly, that zone 2 running builds an aerobic base pretty slowly, so beginners can get results in less time by running at a slightly higher effort. So these arguments seem plausible to me, but I'd love to hear from an expert. What do you think of these assertions? Thank you for your time and expertise.
There we go. Cool question, Lindsey.
It is a good question. And at the heart of the answer, Paul, is quite simply, it depends on why you are running. Okay. So if you are running for pure health benefit, general lifestyle improvement and improving quality of life, and to maintain movement, then it probably doesn't matter. Okay. Because then all these arguments are 100% right. You'll burn more calories, burn more energy, and you will get more movement if you are doing higher intensity, and you will definitely get faster benefits by doing higher intensity, shorter duration. So, and this is kind of, to use a known methodology, this is kind of the Tabata methodology. You've got 20 minutes to train 3 to 4 times a week. How can you get the most out of those 20 minutes? Okay, but that's a totally different way of thinking and reason for doing exercise. What doesn't change in that is that the highest risk for hurting yourself and stopping your running journey is high intensity exercise, particularly if you're just starting out, you haven't been doing any forms of exercise, you suddenly want to improve your health and lose a bit of weight, tone up, all these good things that come from exercise. The quickest way to stop your journey is to overdo it by doing too high intensity, pulling a muscle, hurting your knee. So the inherent risk of activity is still there, and the higher intensity that you go at the beginning, the higher that risk becomes. But in terms of getting the most out of limited time, yes, high intensity will get you far. I don't want to say better results, but it'll get you faster results, and you'll definitely burn more calories in a shorter amount of time. Okay, now, if you're running because you want some kind of performance benefits, we want to improve a 5K time, or 3-mile time, I want to complete a half marathon, then even with limited days of training and limited time, the performance improvements over time will be better and more sustainable if we do it correctly. Okay. If you're building up to run a half marathon, okay, if I go outside now, whether I've never run before in my life or not, I will run further if I run slower and incorporate run walking. So if I'm a beginner and I just go out and run, I'll last 5 minutes. If I've never run before in my life and I go out and I just let myself run, I'll last 5 minutes. But if I go out and say, right, I'm going to run 1 minute and walk 4 minutes, I will last 20 minutes. So you have to look at, what is it that I'm training for? What's my best pathway to get there? Okay. Now, pure performance benefit, to be the best runner you can be, you have to build a big aerobic base. And that means that we do need to train in zone 2. However, what does zone 2 mean? You're absolutely right. Your heart rate is just going to spike, but we've got lots of ways that we can control that. But if we want to just avoid injury, we don't have to worry about the intensity too much. Because if we say, right, I'm going to build this up really slow, and Brad's heard this so many times, because I have a saying that is this: the slower you go, the more sustainable the change. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that quite literally, the slower that you start running, but also there's a dual meaning. That's why I use that phrase, the slower you go, because both the slower you run, number one, and two, the slower you build up, the more sustainable the change is going to be. Why? Because if you throw yourself at it and ignore common sense and then go, well, I just want the most I can get out of my 20 minutes, it's going to be an unpleasant 20 minutes. You're going to feel terrible. You're going to feel unfit. You're going to feel the lack of training that you've ever done. And it's a horrible experience. And you actually have to have quite a lot of willpower to push yourself through, effectively killing yourself 3 times a week. But if you go slowly in that 20 minutes, it'll be a much more pleasant experience. And it'll allow you to build up. And then number 2, and even more important, the likelihood of hurting yourself if you use zone 2 type of training or principles of training, the likelihood of hurting yourself at the start of the journey is much, much, much lower. It's not non-existent. And I think this is the important thing for people to understand, is that even when you do things properly and perfectly, the risk of hurting yourself is high. I mean, if you've done very little exercise in your life and you start walking for exercise, that is a big jump. And you can get shin splints. You can pull your calf muscle. You can get Achilles issues. So these things can happen anyway. But the higher intensity that you start at, the higher the risk of those things happening. So we start slow, we build up slow, and that makes this change infinitely sustainable. It makes the journey much more enjoyable. Does it make it a bit more frustrating? Of course it can, because progress is also going to be slow. The first 4 to 6 weeks are literally just about allowing your soft tissue to develop at a pace that makes this journey possible, and it will allow you to do a 5K and then chase a 10K and then chase a 21K. So yeah, I buy into the argument that you can get more out of your time from a health point of view, but it doesn't take the risk away. And number 2, to build anything that's sustainable and performance based in the medium to long term, then we've got to develop the aerobic base before we do anything else.
Great question, Jason. Thank you so much for being in touch. Don't forget, if you have a question you'd like answered on this podcast, simply click on the link that's in the description, whether you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening on whatever podcast player you listen on. The link is there. Just click on it. We love video questions. We filter those to the top. So if you do have a question, please pop them through there. It doesn't have to be video, but we do favor those. You can leave us an audio voice note, or you can type your question there as well. So just click on that link. Lindsey, as always, great to catch up. Thanks for your time today. We look forward to catch up again soon. And I'm just going to ask everybody here too. The podcast has been growing really nicely, but I know we can grow even more. And one of the ways that we do grow is if we get ratings and reviews on various podcast players. So if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or if you're listening on Spotify, please do leave us a rating or review. We put these together so that we can help as many people as possible. We don't charge for these podcasts. We do have a coaching business. So if you'd like to work with us, you can, but you are able to listen to these pieces of content absolutely free. And it's a bit of a gentleman's agreement. So if we put these out, we need your help to spread the word. So if you wouldn't mind leaving us a rating or review, we really would appreciate that. Until next time, from the two of us, it's cheers.